listening to Represent, the queermusicals.com podcast. Hello and welcome to Represent, the queermusicals.com podcast. I'm here in New York again at Podstream Studios with Evan Kinnane and Ben Jackson Walker, and I'm going to get them just to say a little bit about themselves, some of the shows that they've been in, what sort of things they do. So let's start with you, Evan.
Hi, I'm Evan Kinnane. Yes, thank you, as you so beautifully have introduced me. I was in the Broadway show Moulin Rouge. I have worked regionally around the country. I recently was working at the Kennedy Center. And now I'm back in New York as an auditioning human being. Hooray! yeah.
Hi, I'm Ben Jackson Walker. Thank you for using all three of my names. It's my equity name, so that's why I have to use it.
I see.
But right now I'm in Juliet on Broadway as Romeo, and that was my Broadway debut. And I've done some TV work. I was in a movie called Honor Society for Paramount Plus, and an episode of Orange is the New Black, and as Deacon and Judy King's assistant. And yeah, I've also worked regionally here and there, and that's about it.
Excellent. So we're here at the moment on its Pride weekend. Obviously, it won't be Pride weekend when this episode goes out, but here's a bit of a spoiler. I'm not just gay in June. So, so this episode will be coming out a bit later, but I was thinking a little bit about representation, which is what this podcast is about, and thinking about maybe places that you might have seen yourself. So thinking about stories or television, film, theatre. What sort of times have you felt represented on stage, or have you felt represented on stage?
I mean, it's like, even now I would say it still feels like limited. Like it still feels like I wish there were more time, like more things on stage or on TV where like I did see myself, but like the ones recently I think where I've like felt the most like, whoa, I know what that feels like. I know that experience was, Heartstopper.
Yes.
Like most recently, that first season when I watched it, I was like, oh my, it's such a beautiful, innocent way to tell it, but I think it's so rare to have something told that purely, but also that honestly. And so that was really moving to me.
Still haven't seen Heartstopper.
That's crazy.
I
know. We need to watch it together.
I know.
Damn.
I don't know what the mental block is there, but I have to get over that soon.
Do you know, I have had,
because it's too perfect.
Yeah,
You're
but
like,
I've also had
I
people that find it really difficult to watch, to get around to watching it.
Yeah.
I think partly because it's got quite a lot of hype behind it, but also partly because for many of us, certainly for me, it's a really difficult time. Like school is not a fun time to go back to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That
So
is
I
true.
bet it's part of that. And anything that sort of has like a lot of hype all at once, I feel very like I'll see it in a bit when it dies down. I can form my own opinion around it, which is just so egotistical. And like I just, that's awful. But I should just join the crowd and watch it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess because it's such a precious time of our lives, it feels like all at once we're celebrating something that for so long we didn't. But it is. Well, I'll get there and I'll love it. I know that I will love it.
Yeah.
First time I saw
really
myself represented in media, I would say maybe the Lizzie McGuire movie.
Oh wow.
Oh, did you dress her first time ever?
Yeah.
Was it
No,
first?
no,
Oh,
it wasn't
okay.
first time,
But the
but
Lizzie
when
McGuire movie.
Yeah, when she like was performing on that stage and she does that famous shake, I was like, that, that feels like it hits home for me.
Yeah.
Many times since then, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm remembering Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen with Lindsay Lohan, and she's in that like pink shirt and those bell-bottom jeans. And I remember wanting to do that.
Yeah,
I was
so
like,
many of those things for me, like
that's the one.
Early in life, where now there's actual representation happening, but like the door into it was all of these women being pop stars and being
It's
queens
true.
and being amazing, and all of us being like, yes, that's what we feel inside.
Yes. And when did you kind of get to express that? How did that kind of work for you?
I grew up with a lot of siblings. I'm one of 9 children. Yes, Irish Catholic family.
Okay.
And now none of us go to church. We've all taken our own routes in life, which is beautiful. But performances and home movies with my siblings and dressing up and putting on little cabarets and lip syncing to A Walk to Remember was huge for me. Do you know that movie, A Walk to
No,
Remember? Oh my
I
God,
do.
Mandy Moore just singing about heartbreak. And I remember being like 8 years old, standing on a table, being like, yeah, like A Walk to Remember. It's late in July. Something. I don't, just
free
being,
singing.
really dramatic. I remember entering all these really just deep dramatic stories as a child with my siblings, and they were kind of like we were just each other's audience.
Yeah.
Really.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, so
I can attest because I've seen all of these videos.
Yeah,
and you can see Evan's creativity blossoming even in the editing of them. There's one in particular I'm remembering where that it like there's a whole storyline to it, like a breakup or something, and then it goes backwards in time, and you see the person like running backwards away from where they just got broken up with. It's
really
pretty
beautiful.
amazing.
It's
No
really
way.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's touching. I'll send you the link.
Oh,
Yeah.
you must. You must. Yes. One of the
Yeah.
things we haven't said is that you're partners. Is that
Oh.
okay
Yeah.
to
Oh,
say?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we are partners. Yes.
Yes.
Roommates, but also partners.
Yeah. Partners in life, in business, and in love.
Yeah. But it's I mean, it's something we haven't had guests on the podcast before, and it's something that's really lovely to see. And you know, actually, it's something that seeing people who are in the industry and are in a happy relationship, and is something to me as somebody who is, you know, a good 20 plus years older than you both. It's really inspiring to see that. And actually, I know for people who are following you, because, you know, people will follow you if they come and see you in a performance. You probably see, you know, there's a bump up in your follower numbers. But just for anyone to see that, I think is so inspiring. And it's, you know, so thank you for that.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
But also, Ben, I was thinking about, for you, you know, is there a time when you thought, oh, actually, this is the moment where I can perform and I can bring myself to this?
Yeah. I mean, I like grew up doing like impressions of everything. I remember doing like, because I had, you know, my dad's video camera, and I was like doing Napoleon Dynamite. And then I remember I'm like Abraham Lincoln for some school project. And then I would like become my grandpa. Like I would be like imitating people in my family. and entertaining all of them like that, but
through a queer lens, of course.
through a queer
Abraham
lens.
Lincoln through a queer lens.
Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? But the ones that really hit home were Cruella de Vil. I would like throw on a million blankets and pretend to be Cruella de Vil, and for some reason, the ugly stepsisters and Cinderella. Like I was fixated on them for like years, and I was obsessed with them. And I would like. Something about them tearing up her dress. I don't know why. I think it was like the flamboyance of it or something, but...
And those all played a part in your creation of Gary in the Honor Society.
Yes, they sure did.
Which I think was the
They sure
first
did.
kind of big... I don't know. That was like the first queer role you got to play.
I think so, yeah. Like definitely in like a professional setting. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that was... So yeah, it's called Honor Society. It's on Paramount Plus, but... I got to play. It's basically about this girl who wants to go to Harvard, and will stop at nothing to make it to Harvard. And so she's one of the top students in the school, and she wants the recommendation from her guidance counselor. But there's 3 other students who are also like up for that recommendation, and so she plans to take them all down one by one. And one of them is the like star lacrosse player of the school, but he is secretly in love with Gary.
Oh,
that's who I played,
yes.
and he's the leader of the theater club. And so she convinces him to join the play so that he will get distracted and his grades will slip and all of that. And then he and Gary start to have a thing for each other and fall in love. And so it's a very similar archetype to like Sharpay and Ryan in High School Musical, which I also was obsessed with when I was younger. But what was really special about it was you got to see that character, you know, not just be kind of like, you know, sassy and confident and, you know, all of these kind of archetypes you see in like a high school gay character, but you got to see him actually like fall in love and like have this arc with another boy at school. And it was really sweet and touching to get like the chance to be able to do that. And that was kind of my first big job too. So I was just like it meant a lot to me to do that. Yeah.
I think these high school series are so important.
Oh, yeah.
Are you noticing a little segue coming here, Evan?
I hear it coming.
Yes.
I feel us opening the next door. Yes.
So I first became aware of Evan's work. It must be in 2020 because it was just before the pandemic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because I've been following this musical for a very long time, which is called The Louder We Get, but was originally called Prom Queen. And came over to the UK. We did a production in the UK at the other Palace as Prom Queen. And it's written by Kent Staines and Colleen Dauncey and Akiva. I'm going to forget the surname.
I just know them as Colleen and Akiva in my brain. Like they're the duo.
Yes, Colleen and Akiva, whose name I will put. I apologise, Akiva. I will put his name
like Madonna.
into the.
They don't have a last name.
Yeah, no, they're powerful enough. It's just Akiva. Yes. That's how they exist in my brain. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, we had this story. We had this story of Marc Hall. Is a Canadian story. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it, Evan, and a little bit about how you got involved with it?
Marc was a high schooler in Canadian at some point who isn't a high schooler anymore. Yes. Marc is in his 30s. Sorry, Marc. But he came up against the Catholic school board of the school that he was going to, and he tried to bring his boyfriend to prom, and they wouldn't allow it, and he fought against them. And The Louder We Get tells that story of him realizing there are people who are against him, and him struggling to understand why, and eventually winning the case and bringing his boyfriend to prom, which is beautiful.
And it had a huge impact across all of Canada, didn't it? Because it set a precedent in the law, which now means that every school in Canada has to allow same-sex partners at prom, which is just amazing.
And what's so beautiful, and I think what The Louder We Get did so beautifully, is just sort of displaying like the innocence of. It just kind of came from Marc being like, I don't understand why. I'm asking a simple question. Is if I can, I just sort of assumed he would be able to bring his boyfriend to prom. He wasn't expecting backlash. And once he received that, he sort of kept the simplicity of like, well, why?
Yes.
There's nothing actually going wrong here. And I think that was what was done so beautifully with this production, and by just Marc in his life, was just remaining sort of not, he wasn't arguing. It was just sort of like, what? Like, there's nothing going on here. There's no issue with this. And it's hard to fight a child who sort of is just innocently being like, this is who I am. And you sort of have to look him in the face and tell him you can't be this way, which is the hard, which I think is why he won. It was it remained so innocent the whole way through.
Yeah, and I really hope that it has a longer life The Louder We Get, because it's a beautiful score, it's a beautiful story, and Kent Staines has been writing it for decades, because it was
such an angel too. Yeah, so good at it.
Well, he wrote a film, didn't he? There was a documentary first, and then Kent wrote a film based on the documentary, which I found with Czech subtitles.
Yes.
I watched it. I don't know where it was, but I watched it. Yeah, somewhere
just on YouTube. Deep in YouTube.
Yeah, and then over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, they've been working on a musical version.
Yeah.
But some of the songs in it are so beautiful, and I'm thinking particularly of the song "Infinite," which you got to sing for that. And
such a gift.
And it's really funny because it's not necessarily a song about sexuality or anything like that, but to me, I find that song really difficult to imagine not being sung by a queer character, if that makes sense. I don't know. How did you find kind of working with that material?
I found it really similar to my own sort of story in a way. I grew up Catholic. Yeah. Gay. Yeah. Sort of for so much of my life, not really thinking about my sexuality being my like what I am, but sort of it just was. Yeah. And I think that's what Marc experienced, was like, this is just my identity. This is just how I feel the world. And that's why in that song Infinite, where he's just explaining like, this is just who we are, and we could be anything that we want to be, and we can be that forever. and that's what he feels with his boyfriend, is just like, this is ours, and it can last forever, and it will last forever. And it just was it was a beautifully therapeutic thing to sort of go through for me, as well, to have Marc there to support it, and to add his opinion in on it, and to be able to turn to him and ask him questions about, and what were you feeling here, and what did the school board mean to you, and what was this conversation like with your dad like, and coming, because his father, at least in the musical, was took him longer to get on board than his mom. And so to have him there throughout the process, to turn to sort of as this guiding light in the process, it was an unbelievable experience. And then to immediately close the show and enter the pandemic was like,
that must have been so hard.
Crazy experience. It was unbelievable, but it sort of amplified the beauty of that experience, to have had that sort of right before the world changed forever, to like have had this capsule of we all got to experience this beautiful moment together. And I love Marc, and we're still in touch, and he's just
Marc is lovely, and it's
a hero, truly.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you one more thing about that, which is, when you're playing a real person as an actor, how do you approach that? Because obviously you're not going to, well, I'd say obviously, it might not be obvious, but you're probably not going to want to do an impression of Marc. So how did you kind of work around that? I remember the first time I met him, we were in rehearsal in Calgary, running the show or running a scene, or we were just in rehearsal, and I think they kind of wanted to plan this huge surprise where he just walked through the rehearsal door and just showed up, and it was, they accomplished it. It was a huge surprise. I had no idea he was going to be there, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, now I have the person who I'm playing, his eyes are watching me, trying to do his story justice, and he was such an angel about it, and didn't expect any sort of, impression to be happening, or to depict exactly what he was feeling, because it is such a universal story for so many of us, that he kind of gave me the freedom to do it the only way that I would know how to do, which is to sort of just take in his experience and try to depict that through my own history and my own past. And and I guess that's just how it happened. It was unique in its way, and it would have been a completely different story if somebody else were to. Actually, Ben.
Oh yeah.
It was one of the first times Ben and I were up for the same role.
Wow.
Yeah, we were.
Which was a crazy experience to.
Wow. That was that was like the second year we had been in the city, I guess. Not even maybe, but we were both up for it, and I think it had gotten down to us two and like one other person.
We were like, should we tell them? Like, how do we go about this? I don't know. I guess we just both do our thing, and then and then we were. It was just the two of us, like in the final call, learning like a dance combination, and I was like, at what point do we mention this, or do we not? And we had this whole we had to have a conversation about like, okay, how are you feeling about this, and how and if you were to get it, I'd be so happy, but also I want it, but also like
I know we had to like talk it through like right before we like went in the room for the time, but I had a feeling. I was like, I think this is Evan's role. It just like makes
but
sense.
Also it could have been so could it could have
course.
easily been yours, and then it would have been a beautiful depiction of what your story, how your story attached to this one, which is
Knowing Evan as well as you do, how did you feel seeing Evan in that role? Did you watch it in the end?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I mean, it was so emotional, because I just, everything that you had just said about, how it resonated with you and in your life. And I was also there with Evan's entire family watching it. So, I'm watching his mom and dad watch it. And it was just really overwhelmingly emotional. And I think it's a really special musical, and it's a really special story that exactly, like you still don't get to see that much like honest queer representation, and so that was like one of the rare moments in theater I was even getting to see that, and then to get to see it as Evan was just absolutely incredible. And I remember there's the scene between Marc and his dad when they're like sitting up in the attic and they're talking, and it's I was inconsolable, and so was his dad. We were all like, oh my God.
It was such
beautiful.
a gift.
Yeah, it really was. It was amazing.
And I loved what you brought to it as well, Evan, because I don't know, I mean, obviously I don't know you at all, but I got the impression that you were playing it as, you know, it was quite very close to you in terms of the role, and there were elements. My favourite moment, I think I can say this because it won't be the same production if it comes back in. My favourite moment is a moment when Marc is trying to come out to his mum and dad, who already know, but my favourite moment is Marc trying to hide, and the different places you found, because I saw it twice. I saw a matinee in the evening, and the different places you were finding to try and hide. I just loved it.
Fun.
Yeah,
it was a really fun moment that we built in rehearsal with Lonnie. Sort of just kind of he trusted me a lot, which I really was blown away by, because I've looked up to him for so long and was so nervous going into this process. And then when we got there and he was as loving and supportive and sort of like let the reins free for me for a really long time, just letting me do whatever I wanted to do, I was blown away by it. And I think that's what birthed that sort of moment, was like, you can do whatever you want here. Because this, I don't know if anybody should direct a coming out scene. Like it should be done by somebody who has come out before and has experienced it, and it's different for everyone. And it just, there was a lot of places to hide on the stage. I tried to find every one of them. Thank you.
I mean, it's a really beautiful story, and if people want to experience some of it, I think one of my favorite videos that when I'm feeling a bit sad, that I always go back to, is the video you recorded over the pandemic of The Louder We Get, the title song. And it's just so lovely. The other thing that is really lovely about this story is that the other kids are immediately behind Marc. There isn't really, I mean, yes, there's one or two questioning, but and that was the moment for me that was so cathartic, was that there's a queer kid here and everyone loves him and everyone is behind him. And I don't know that I don't know if I've ever seen that story before. And so that song, The Louder We Get, is so important. And the range of people in the cast, you know, so I guess there may have been, you know, other queer people in the cast, you know, people from different backgrounds, all this sort of thing. And just that reminder that everyone, you know,
it was cathartic for me as well, because in high school that wasn't something that I experienced, mostly because I wasn't out until my senior year. And so I didn't even open the door for myself to even try to have that experience. So to experience that on stage and in Marc's story was cathartic for me as well, to be like, this can happen. This can exist and does exist, and hopefully exists more today. I mean, it's so much, it's so beautiful. We have access to so many things and stories and narratives now through social media and through, which is a big issue in some ways, but I think has allowed people to look at themselves and look at other people and see, just open their minds to more things than previously we were able to. And I think that has allowed people to just sort of like accept themselves and others. Hopefully.
Absolutely. Yes, let's hope
more easily.
So. Yeah. If you're interested in LGBTQ+ representation in musical theatre, check out our website www.queermusicals.com for lots more information about musicals with LGBTQ+ characters.
It was a cool show. I loved it so much. I'm glad you saw it.
Really me too. Me too. That was, I was ever so lucky to be able to get to Calgary to see that. And to meet Stafford and to meet Nick, who was playing your dad as well. And you know, so it features. I'm going to plug my book. How exciting!
It will
feature in the book that I'm still writing at the moment. On this podcast, I think I've spoken about this book every series. It's just a few months away.
If I was writing a book, I would be telling every single person I've ever. That is the most impressive thing in the world. Writing is so daunting to me. So
well, it's daunting to me as well, which is why it's taken so long. But hopefully, The Louder We Get. Well, when the book is published, The Louder We Get definitely will feature in that, because it's such a lovely musical, and to me personally, is such an important show. It's one of the first shows I saw that kind of inspired me to write the book. So I look forward to the words finally arriving on the page and for everyone to be able to read them. But thanks Evan for that.
Of course.
Ben, I was going to talk a little bit to you about your first Broadway role.
Yeah.
Of Romeo in and Juliet, which is another one of my absolute favourite shows. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the show, maybe a little bit about your role in it?
Yeah, so the show is, obviously it's a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. Well, not really a retelling, but it's kind of, what would happen if Juliet, kept on living her life, decided to stay here and keep on going, and Romeo, his life ends, and that's it.
Yes.
And so it's kind of
put.
there's a what'd you say?
That's so beautifully put.
So beautifully put. Yeah,
his
thank
life
you.
ends.
Thank you. His life ends. But anyway, so it's kind of told through this frame of Shakespeare and his real life wife, Anne Hathaway. They are kind of like, telling the story, and his wife, Anne, takes the reins and is like, well, what would happen if Juliet didn't die? What would happen if, she goes out in the world and she has a friend, the character of May, who is a non-binary character, and then Anne Hathaway becomes one of the friends as well, and then they kind of go about this story. They go to Paris. Juliet meets somebody new, but then at the very end of Act 1, this is a bit of a spoiler, but Shakespeare decides to stir things up a little bit and write Romeo back into the show. So I won't say too much, but there is a grand entrance where Romeo comes back.
It's on the subway. It's on the subway ad.
It's true.
I don't think
At
it's a
this point,
spoiler.
it's not that
I
big
don't
of a
think you need to be hiding your
It's
entrance.
true. See, I was trained in the beginning of this at press things to be like, don't talk about your character
yes,
that
as
much.
you
Say as
do.
little as you can.
Release it, Ben.
I'm releasing it. But yeah, and so this has been my Broadway debut in this role, and yeah, it's all the music of Max Martin.
Yes.
Who's like one of the biggest pop hit writers of all time. He has almost as many hits as John Lennon and Paul McCartney. He's written for like every pop star, and so it uses all of their songs, and the book ties in all these songs into the story, which it does for a jukebox musical in really, really witty ways, which is not always the case.
No.
But they work really well in this instance, because when people hear the songs, they know what's coming, or they know how it's going to tie in.
Yeah.
So it always gets a big laugh. But yeah, it's a really, really fun, joyous show.
And it's a very queer show as well.
It is, yeah.
With Francois and May particularly, I guess explicitly. Although I have always thought of Romeo as being a queer character
Yes.
as well.
100%.
I have too. I mean, that's how I approached it from the beginning, and that's actually conversations that me and our director Luke Shepard had in the very beginning of, Romeo. There's a scene in the beginning which we had been talking about, and they have a Romeo's funeral, and everyone's at Romeo's funeral, and all of his exes are there, and Juliet figures out just how many exes Romeo had, but it's truly anyone. It's everybody on stage is an ex of Romeo.
Yes.
So we say, he's pan, or he's bi, or he's, it's everything. So he is a queer character.
Yeah.
And this just happens to be the story of, the love story of him and Juliet.
Yes.
And then a big thing I kind of, took into it when I started was when you read the play, like, Romeo is such an emotional character, and there's so many times in the script he's actually described as being very feminine and being overly emotional, and so I kind of took those parts of him and ran with it, and I was like, well, I connect to those parts, so that's going to be my version of Romeo. So yeah,
it's a really fun role in terms of, I guess, in some ways, if you're thinking quite stereotypically, it's very stereotypically like a queer, narcissistic, the sort of boyfriend we've probably all had at some stage.
Right.
And,
yes.
How do you kind of put yourself into that? That sounds like I'm asking you a question. Is it just like you, Ben? Is this who you are?
Just like me.
Maybe that's a question for you, Evan. I don't know.
maybe. I mean, I think something that I've always connected with in this version of Romeo is, he's a young boy who really doesn't have a whole lot of experience, and the biggest experience in his life, the biggest tragedy kind of is meeting Juliet and then figured out that he's banished and he can't be with her anymore. And so it's kind of, you know, this big, huge fall from, you know, not really having anything bad happen to you to having something bad happen to you. And I can relate to that when I was younger, and, you know, just having up until a certain point, you know, my parents got divorced when I was going into college. And I always kind of went back to that when I was reading the script, because I was like, that was a really hard time in my life where it was just like, you know, it was a big fall. I didn't really understand a whole lot of tragedy in my life. And so it was a big, you know, like the floor falling out from under you. And so that's something I always kind of connected to with this version of Romeo of, well, you know, when something happens like that, it is devastating, you know? And so that's kind of what happens to Romeo in this. He comes back from the dead, and he's back, and he expects Juliet to take him back into his arms. And she's like, no, I've moved on. No. And so that's devastating to him. So that's always kind of how I viewed it. Yeah.
The other thing I love about Romeo, and I know that this is sometimes a bit tricky because of some of the tropes around bisexual characters and the idea of bisexual people being greedy, which is, you know, a terrible thing.
Right.
But also, I love the idea of characters that can be polyamorous, or characters that can be in love with more than one person at a time. And I, you know, whilst I think most musicals or most stories would treat that as, you know, he's cheating, he's a cheat.
Right.
Whereas there's also a thing about, if that's how Romeo is Juliet really the right person for him? You know, would he not be better with somebody who also kind of was polyamorous or that sort of thing?
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think that there's a tiny moment where you're sort of like pitching yourself back to Juliet, and she's like, I've made my decision, and I think that we are better apart. Like, I think your life is different than mine.
Yeah.
We are
right.
And I love that we're it's amazing that we're diving so deeply into Juliet, because it's like it's we're taking what we can get, sort of like with this representation, but like it just goes to show there's so much that has yet to sort of be presented in a way to us where it's like, I don't know. I don't think that we're writing the show to be like, I hope people have in-depth conversations about Romeo's pansexuality.
Right.
Like, we are so desperate and ready for more stories to be given to us in a way that is like, this is for you.
Yeah.
This feels like.
And what's interesting too is there's a lot of,
we're like grasping.
Yeah. There's a lot of like younger kids and queer kids who come and see the show, who
they're
actually
desperate for it too.
They what?
They're desperate for it too.
No, they
They're
absolutely are. So they see
thank
that in
God.
Romeo as well. They're like they see that scene in the very beginning, and they latch onto it. And they're like, oh my God, Romeo's pan, Romeo's bi, or, you know, they latch onto the story of May and Francois, and it is so meaningful to them. I mean, I can't tell you, like, when we were in Toronto, like kids would like chase us down the street and be like, tears in their eyes, sobbing, like, thank you so much, I saw myself on stage. And like that, I can't think of, I don't know of any when I was growing up, going to Broadway shows. I think by the time I had seen like queer representation on stage, it was seeing Fun Home, I think. Might have been the first one.
Yeah.
And I remember like reading that comic in college and being so moved by it. And that was before I had even come out yet.
Yeah.
And so
Falsettos too. Falsettos was like one of the first times I was like, oh my gosh, a complicated, fully fleshed, like queer characters happening.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It is.
More. The world is ready. The world is waiting and hungry and ready.
If you want to follow us on social media, you can use queer.musicals on Instagram or Facebook, or you can follow me at Dr. James Lovelock on Instagram. I think that might be my next question, actually, is what other stories would you like to see on Broadway? You know, maybe what sort of people would you like to see represented, but also maybe what sort of stories about queer people might be
like a gay person at a grocery store. Like, I don't like and buys and saying not actually, but like gay people
imagine?
like
gays at the grocery
gay
store.
people just exist, like
it
it not being like a tragedy or like
Mm-hmm.
it being normal and fully fleshed and like and complicated, because it is complicated to be a queer person in the world and in this country. And I just think more of that, where you can see other people going through complicated things. Because I think for a while it has been like the joke, or it has been
The
something that
tragedy of
sells
it.
tickets
Yeah.
in a way that's sort of like, this person is our gay person in the show,
Right,
you know, like,
right.
or it has been something like, I think of Angels in America. I think of something like that's beautiful, but also just like, and now we're dead.
Yes.
Right.
Like, we're telling a story of that is important, but also just like, I don't know, like, we're here and we're living life every day. And I think those everyday stories where it's in there, but there are also just a million other things happening.
Right.
Where they're at the grocery store.
Yes.
Right.
You know,
That's
a
the
gay
important
person at a
thing.
grocery store. I want to see that on stage right now.
I remember the HBO Max show It's a Sin. Watching that was so moving
so
and
good.
beautiful. And of course, you know, it's unbelievably tragic. It's about the AIDS epidemic. But my favorite parts of it were watching that main character, you know, kind of have his sexual awakening in the city. And just like, it's so joyous. And he's just kind of like, you know, you're watching him be a really young kid, you know, having all these crazy nights and making mistakes and, you know, falling in love with all these different people. And that's what I remember, because, like, you know, when everything is so tragic and sad in the end, it is gutting and it is so emotional, and it's amazing the way it's done. But what was so moving to me was just getting to see that.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, that's so rare that you'd get to see a young person just like finding themselves and having kind of a coming of age story without it being a tragedy, and having it be joyous. Yeah, that one was really moving.
Now
to
you've
me.
said that, actually it makes me realize how outside of television, because I'm thinking, you know, things like sex education really have done this, but it's so, you know, people make such a fuss about a gay kiss, but I'm like, hold on, what about actually a passionate gay scene?
Right.
And I'm really struggling to think of, certainly in musical theatre, anywhere where you get the sort of scenes that you might get in some of the, you know, some of musicals with heterosexual couples.
Absolutely.
Well, even in things
Hardly
like,
any.
I think back to when we were staging The Louder We Get, it was like, we have to save the kiss for the end, because that is the big moment that everyone, like, this has to be at the end. And I remember having conversations where I was, can we show affection like when can we show affection, when can't, like, why does the kiss have to be like the big moment? Especially we were coming off of the prom, where the kiss, like at the Thanksgiving Day parade, was like the first queer kiss between two characters like ever shown on public television, like in a musical. Like, it was such a big moment. And then thinking about our show, there was almost this like competition as we were putting together The Louder We Get, which is another musical about two gay people going to prom, where it was like, is this the right time to be doing this? Like, we just sort of saw this story, and I was like, but guys, like, gay people go to prom all the time. Like, this story happens again and again. I see a lot of straight people falling in love again and again and again and again. Why do we have to be sort of pinning the two we have right now, these two stories where it's like, we just saw this, we don't need to see it again. And it's like, actually, we just need to be see more of it. We don't need to be.
And the stories are so different.
Very different.
Completely.
So
because they're different people.
Right.
I mean, even though the prom, yes, the prom is the central thing, but really neither of the musicals are particularly about the prom.
No.
You know, the prom is the end point. It's about the relationships around it, isn't it? So, And every gay person who goes to prom goes to prom in a different way.
Right.
And those stories can be interesting.
And every gay person that goes to the grocery store
buys
to the
different
grocery
produce.
store.
Yes, we buy different produce. Goes to the grocery store in different ways.
Some get lime, some get lemon.
I love that. Gay person at the grocery store, starring Evan.
Yes. I'll play the celery.
Meet you in the produce aisle.
This podcast was recorded at Podstream Studios in New York. You can find out more at www.podstreamstudios.com. It does make me realise how little we see musicals that have more than one queer character, and the two queer, or the more than one queer characters fall in love, and that it ends with the two queer characters still in love. And it, it makes me think there's so much more room for these sorts of stories. I would be really fascinated to see a story where you played in the same musical. I think that would be really fun.
Oh, love that. That is the dream.
That's a dream of ours. Well, I remember in The Ladder We Get, I was like, I want to play the boyfriend. I want to be that part.
It was cast. It was cast.
Yeah.
I know, it was already cast. But I mean, yes, that needs to happen. We need to write it.
Love that.
I mean, that's one of the things that I ask a lot of people is about, do you know anything that's being written that's of this sort of thing, or do you write, or anything like
I've got a dream of writing something. I just find it very daunting, and the blank page isn't inspiring to me. It's horrifying. But at some point I will buckle down, and it just
I think it's one of those things that comes at the right time. I wrote a musical all years ago, probably over a decade ago now.
You did?
Yeah,
Congratulations.
I did. Well, thank you. But I mean, it got put on at the university I was studying at, and then we did one performance in London as well.
Oh, cool.
Amazing.
And it was it's very similar. I mean, this wasn't around at the time. It was very similar to is it My Policeman, the one with Harry Styles in?
Oh, yeah.
The two timelines. So it's a couple in the present, and then seeing what they were like when they were younger and how they got to where they are. And I mean, it would need a huge rewriting, because I'm such a different person now, and I want to represent things in a very different way. But that musical came to me at the right time. It took years to write, but I couldn't have written it. I don't think I could write it now from scratch, and I don't think I could have written it before. And I think I think it's great that you're kind of open to those sorts of stories and being able to write them, and maybe finding people to help you to write them or to collaborate with you and that sort of thing. Because I think one of the difficulties has been that there's, that yes, there are a lot of queer writers, but sometimes it is really difficult to access the things that we need, the experiences that we need to be able to write. Because some of a lot of the experiences that I look back on and think, oh, that wasn't very fun. Oh, I don't really want to show that part of myself. That kind of thing.
Right, and you're always doubtful that there will be people who will relate to it. Yeah. You're like, it feels so like mine, and I don't I can't fathom that showing these things will resonate with people. And yet, when you do show those parts of yourselves, it is just, more often than not, people are coming to you and being like, and that is exactly how I felt.
Yes.
It's just...
Or the messy feelings.
It's hard to trust
that don't really make sense all the time. They don't always know exactly what they mean. Those are the ones that can be so universal.
Yeah. It's inspiring to hear that you wrote something that you are now allowing yourself to see and wanting to change, because you're saying you couldn't write it now, but you wouldn't be able to write it now without having written it in the past.
Yes. And that's right. And it's one of those things that I think for some people, I think some people can just write. Andrew Lloyd Webber. I mean, it's amazing that the amount of musicals that people like Angela Webber write. But for me, there was a musical that I wrote 12 years ago, and I might just about be ready in the next 5 years to write something else again. But it all depends on everything else that's going on around, because we all have other jobs. Mostly, there's not many people who are just writers. But I do hope that people feel inspired to write things. It's one of the other things that I've always wanted to set up as well, is like a queer writing group where we can all kind of support each other in writing it, because there are so many stories about queer people. We are different, and there are moments that are different that we need to show people that they're not on their own. I think that's really important. I was thinking today about the kind of that moment that we have before we come out to anyone else, but we know ourselves, and how that when you go, I think I'm gay, and for me there was probably 3 or 4 years between me knowing that. I mean, there was far more than that, because I probably knew I was gay from about 4, to be honest. But when I kind of knew what that was when I was 12, I didn't come out really until I was 15 or 16, and even then in a very limited way. there's something about that kind of experience that I think maybe bonds queer people. I mean, not everyone will have that experience, but I guess a lot of people would.
Absolutely. I think it's such a beautiful idea of like it sort of existing in side of you, what it is inside of you, and like it's yours for so long, and then you sort of have to have this moment of telling everybody else, like there's so much fear around that, but like the beauty of like it, of whatever that is that's inside of you, and like what you're nurturing, and it being this like little tiny also gigantic secret of yours, like that's such a beautiful idea of like what is it before you share it. I don't know, that's such a gorgeous, that makes me excited to think about, because it is different for everybody, but also everybody can relate to it who's ever had to experience getting to know themselves in that way.
Absolutely.
But that's such a different perspective as well, Evan, because I think when I think of it as quite a negative time, like having to hide this thing and
100%,
you know, being scared to tell anybody, and you know, what's the response going to be? Are people still going, you know, my family still going to love me? You know, are people still going to, is this going to make my life more difficult? Which usually the answer is yes. But that's a really lovely way to think of it. Thank you. Yeah. Are there any other sort of experiences like that you think, you know, like for queer people that might be interesting to kind of explore? Which maybe we only go on, sorry.
Well, I always think it's really interesting. Maybe it's more because of it's closer to the time of life I think we're both in, but it's like, you know, you see, I think you see a lot of like coming out stories or the process of that, or you hear more about those. I think what's interesting too is like what happens right after you come out.
Yes.
And then you're like, okay, and then trying to find community and trying to find, I don't know. I was found, you know, before I came out was very, very difficult, obviously. And then after I did, it was very freeing. Like it was a really good time in my life. And then as it kind of went on, I was like, okay, now that's when the real work kind of happens. And that's when you're like, well, now I have to find myself without that. And who am I without this secret? And then who am I without, you know, newly having come out of the closet and feeling free of it? It's like then adjusting to just being a queer person, navigating the world. Like it's fascinating, and it's interesting right now because it does seem like there's been so much more acceptance around it. But there's still, I mean, you know, I think it's hard to like see ourselves in different areas of life. It's hard to, you know, I don't know that many married gay people. I don't know that many married gay people with kids. Like that's all something I find really fascinating. And I don't think we get to see a whole lot of people. Actually, that's something I would love to see like on stage or in a musical or in a movie is queer couples.
That gets complicated too, because then you're like, are these queer people inserting themselves into a hetero normative narrative of like, what does it mean to be a successful couple in this world? Is like having in this country, like having kids, having being married and having children. Like that isn't a queer story.
Right.
It can be a queer story, but like that is for so long has just been like mom and dad fall in love, have babies, and like that's obviously the dream because that has been taught to us to be the dream. But it's like, if is it just it gets complicated. So you're like, am I just proving that I can be a person in this world because I can fall in love and have kids? Like, what is it? It's so beautiful for queerness to just be like, it is anything. Like, because we've had to create our own narratives for so long, there's like a limitless sort of like possibilities of what your life can look like. It is also daunting. Like sometimes I am jealous of like looking at straight couples being like, they have so much laid out for them. They have like a rule book. They have like what what it looks like their life should be. But also that horrifying.
Doesn't always work.
That is limiting. And
I have this image that I sometimes use with my students about you start in the middle of a forest, and when you're finding your sexuality is a bit like finding your way out of the forest, except there's already one path out of the forest, and that path is lit brightly, and signposted, and you're always going to follow that path because that path looks safe. But and actually for straight people, that's a path, and there's nothing wrong with that path. It takes you out of the forest. It does what you want to do. But what if you look down the path and you see the end of it and it's not where you want to go? And then I think for queer people it's a bit like exploring sort of. Yeah, we have to kind of find our own paths through the forest, and they're not always lit, and they're not always safe. And then I suppose as an older queer person, my job now is to kind of try and signpost some of those paths to make them easier for other people to follow.
That's so beautiful.
That is really beautiful.
Yeah, it is in the book. It will be in the book.
Oh my God, that's gorgeous, and I want to take your class.
Yeah,
so great. Because the dark isn't you think of the dark being dangerous. It's not. It's not a dangerous thing.
Right.
And you go into the dark and you leave light for other people.
Yeah, it's only dangerous if people make it dangerous. So. Other people. Yeah, so there's all sorts of things in that. That's a very brief version of it, but
that's amazing.
Yeah, so thank you for kind of all those, because some of the things you've spoken about there, actually, I hadn't even thought about as being part of our queer experiences, and it just goes to show that there are so many more stories to tell, and hopefully you will get to act and sing in them. In the future. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure. And thank you everyone for listening, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye.
Yes,
bye.
Goodbye.
On the next episode of Represent the QueerMusicals.com podcast, we're joined by actor and director Joshua Castile. This episode will be published on Monday the 26th of August. See you there.